Welcome back, and today we're going to talk about alignment. What in the world is alignment? Well, make sure that you're reading your textbook. I believe that alignment in our textbook is, where'd you go? Which chapter is this? Chapter 3, Alignment. All right, so read chapter 3 this week if you have not already done so, and I'm sure that you have. But anyhow, let's go ahead and talk about what alignment is. Well, first let me just type that out here. Alignment, if I can spell it. Make that a little bit bigger there for you to see a little bit easier on your screen when I export this video. Alignment is the principle of design that I cannot spell. The principle of a design that uses the edges of elements to create movement by placing their edges in the same horizontal or vertical plane. What? Again, Tim Birch manages to create a definition that's even more complicated than the book says, or even the word itself. Alignment. Well, first of all, we need to talk about elements. I think you'd remember what elements are. I feel certain that you are. Elements. In this case, any on screen, any object, not necessarily on the screen, in the layout. Of course, remember the layout is the graphic design project itself, an advertisement, a billboard, a flyer, whatever. It could be text, art, such as a logo, or a photo. Now, since we're dealing with printed material, we're talking about ink on a paper, right? Ink on some sort of surface. That means that since, of course, obviously you file this under dub, but we're dealing with basically two-dimensional design, 2D design. In other words, they have every element has a width and height, but since they're printed, there's not a whole lot of depth, except in special cases such as embossing, and we're not even going to worry about that third dimension for a long time to come in this class. All right, let me see if I can pull this down here just a little bit more to give us some more room on the screen. There we go. So width and height mean if everything's got a width and a height, that means that elements have edges. The top edge, the bottom edge, the left edge, and right edge. Even if the element itself is not rectangular, it can be a circle or whatnot, the left edge and the right edge and the top and the bottom of a circle, still, if you were to extend those out, would form a square, or if it's an oval, it would form some sort of a rectangle. And what I'm talking about here is these invisible lines. So that the top, the bottom, the left, and the right edges form a rectangle, whether it's visible or implied, whether it's visible or implied, in other words, invisible, that demarcate on that object, on that element, its width and its height, is what I'm trying to say. And we're going to see this here in a second when we get into Photoshop. So think of every element, regardless of what actual shape it is, as taking up sort of a rectangular area based on its width and its height. Now, those edges, whether they are real or invisible and implied, can line up with each other. Can line up with the edges of other elements, is what I meant to say. And how they line up indicates their type of alignment. And just like the edges themselves, we have types of alignment. Left aligned, right aligned, centered and in okay, so here we have the types of alignment. Sorry, I kind of quit talking there. I was trying to concentrate on typing correctly for a change. But if two elements have their left edges, whether they're real or not, forming the same vertical line, or well, you'll see here in just a second, then they're considered to be left aligned. The opposite would be right aligned. If neither the left or the right side of the elements are aligned, but each one has half of its width on one side of an invisible line and the other half of its width on the other side of an invisible line, then it's considered centered. So actually, instead of talking about this, let me just go ahead and get back into our wonderful world of, let me get rid of that, wonderful world of the pet ad that we had here. And I'm just going to show you what I meant. If I can get this to work. This small layout on the screen is not very kind to my palettes here. Kind of throwing me off. Anyhow, I'm going to go down. I'm going to create a new line, and I'm going to show you how even non-rectangular shapes, and text actually has a shape, actually have a width and a height that form invisible lines. Now with text, it's pretty easy. So let me just create a rectangular area that encompasses the width and the height of this text box. I'm going to use my paint bucket tool. And first I'm going to select pixels with my marquee tool, which is what I did after creating a new layer, which I did not do. Oops, glad I talked myself through that. And that's the new layer button right there. And let me just do that again. I created a new layer by clicking on this button. Then I went to my marquee tool to select a rectangular area of Photoshop project. Click, drag, then release. Once the shape is the desired size is reached, I'm going to go to my paint bucket tool, and it's going to fill any pixels. It's going to convert any pixels inside the selected area with the foreground color, which in this case is green, and I can change my foreground colors by clicking on the swatches palette. Okay, now the green area represents the total amount of area based on this text box's width and height. So the right edge of this text box lines up right to the immediate right of the exclamation point. The left side lines up to the C and the N. Now, where two or more lines line up in a text box, that tells you what the text box's alignment is. Ooh, that's hard to say. And in this case, and in most cases here, almost all of my text boxes are in fact left aligned because their left sides line up. Now the interesting thing is, let me just draw some more text boxes out here. And again, I'll go to my paint bucket tool. I'm just going to give you a visual demonstration of the text box shapes, and in so doing, reveal their alignment to you. And since almost all of these, all but one, have their text boxes lining up along the left side of the green rectangle that they occupy, the space that they occupy, like I said, they are considered to be left aligned. But here's an interesting thing. Notice how the V on the first line and the B in the second line of this particular text box, I'm going to zoom in here so you can kind of see the pixels as well. You'll notice how those letters, the V and the B on the second line, are not lined up along the left side of this green rectangle, which denotes the space that the whole thing occupies, width and height. And let me fix this here just a little bit. Okay. However, the R in Discover and the R in Bureau Member do line up along the right side. So therefore, this is considered to be right-aligned text. And this is by far the two most common types of alignment that you're going to see in any graphic design project as far as text goes. You're going to see text that's aligned either to the left or to the right. And here we have examples of both. Another common alignment is centered alignment, which is not recommended. But I'll change this this top text here to center alignment just for a few seconds here for demonstration purposes. Now neither the left or the right sides of the two lines of text line up. However, there is as much, if I was to draw an invisible line, which I can do by going to View, Rulers, and then clicking inside the vertical ruler, holding down and dragging out. If I dragged out to the center of the page, and I'll just pretend that I got that exactly right, you'll notice that there's as much text, or the text on the left side of this guide extends out to the left of that line as far as it does on the right on both lines. So that means that it is centered text. Now I can just go ahead and go to View and Clear Guides, and then View and get rid of Ruler to get rid of that. Sometimes I work with the ruler on, sometimes I don't. It just depends on the type of project. Anyhow, so that is left, right, and centered text. And I really don't have anything here for justified text. So what I'll do here is in this case, I'm going to jump back and show you, since that's where I left off, justified text. This is justified text, also known as block text. It is justified text or block when two or more lines of text in the same text box line up on both the left and right sides of the shape, the area / rectangle. Wow, that was a horrible misspelling of the text box itself. Okay, a little bit convoluted there, but I'm going to show you what I mean by this. Here it's left aligned. All the characters on the left side line up on the left side, the left margin, but they do not do that on the right margin. See how it goes out to here, then it goes out to here on the second line, and third line it goes out almost as far. Third line not quite as far, and the last line is it doesn't go out nearly as far. However, and you know this from Microsoft Word, so this really isn't a shocking revelation to you, I can make it justified so that all the lines that did not go all the way out to the left get stretched out by adding space between the letters and numbers and punctuation marks, so that all but the last line up down the right side as well as the left. So that is left, right, centered, and justified text. And it is also, come back here, Photoshop. It is also a primer into left, right, and alignment of shapes. And we'll get into more about how these shapes can be aligned, including photos and whatnot, here in just a second. Now let's take a look at how we can extend the concept of the principle of alignment to more than just text. Well, first of all, before I move on, I want to point out the fact that the edges of elements are what form the invisible lines. And invisible lines affect where the eye goes. Where the eye goes, what it sees first, what it sees second, what it sees third, so on and so forth, until it comes to the last thing that it notices, that is known as movement, and it's extremely important. I'm not really for sure if and where that's talked about in our book. I believe it is, but I can't remember which chapter. But anyhow, I'll be talking about that throughout the semester. Now you'll notice that I've added in the rulers again, and I brought out a guide here. And what I meant to do, well, actually, I really didn't mean to do it while I was designing things. It just kind of turned out that way because I was running out of room. But you'll notice that our text boxes start to line up here. If I just move them just a little bit, see how they all line up to this guide here? And in order to make that a little bit more obvious, I'm going to move these green boxes that are actually on another layer. I'm going to click on the Move tool now. There we go. Now, of course, these green boxes would never be used in the actual finished product, although sometimes you can emphasize text by putting it against a rectangle like that, but clearly this is not an example of when or how to do that. I just did that so you could see the left, right, top, and bottom edges of each text box. Okay, but now see how the left edge of this text box, which is center aligned, lines up with the left edge of this text box, the bulleted list, and it also lines up with the left edge of the bottom. That means that these three separate elements share a common left alignment, which is this invisible guide here, which would also not be printed in our final product. However, we don't really have much of a strong line here. We don't have as much of a strong line on the top text box as we could have, and I'm going to show you how we can strengthen that by just simply clicking on the text box here, and we're going to make this top text box left aligned like it was before. It would help if I actually clicked on the right layer. There we go. I'm going to use my Move tool again. Actually, I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard. So now everything lines up. And let's go ahead and clear our guides and get rid of the ruler as well. And you can still see the alignment. This edge lines up perfectly with this edge, which lines up perfectly with this edge. And Adobe knows that this is one of the major principles of design, and that's why they include things like guides in Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator and their other programs, because graphic artists should always be lining things up. I like to tell students, pretend that you get an extra $100 for every project that you take, for everything that you line up with something else. It's kind of, silly, but in a way it's kind of also accurate. So now this is by no means a layout. This is pre-thumbnail stage. This is not actually any sort of intended design. I just do things here randomly, simply for the sake of demonstrating text boxes and grouping in our previous lecture, and I'm just kind of continuing on with this lecture, just for the convenience sake. Okay, now we could also align things to the top and the bottom. And again, like I said, this is not for actual design purposes, but let's go ahead and get back to our rulers. Go to View, Rulers, or do what I'm doing, the keyboard shortcut, Control R. And I'm going to bring a guide down to the top of the Specialties text box, and you'll notice that that almost lines up with this right here, the contact information. If I bring this down just a little bit, notice how now they are top aligned. Objects, shapes, including text boxes, can be aligned to the top and the bottom as well as to the left and right. And the more things you line up like that, you'll start to notice a grid forming as well. And we'll talk about grids in a little bit. Now, what can I line this up with? Well, this edge doesn't line up with anything, does it? We could say, well, it almost lines up with, the left edge of the word care, but left aligning one thing to the right edge of something else really isn't alignment, so that doesn't count. But just by taking a quick look around, and I'm sure you've already realized this, I could make that contact information, the text, I could make the text itself right aligned to get a strong line down the right side where all the text lines up, which would match and then line up perfectly with the equally right aligned text down here. And again, I can't stress this enough. This is not an actual layout. This would never become a thumbnail in its current form. That would be embarrassing. There's no design here, but it's starting to show up as, we're starting to incorporate the elements so it's at least a little bit more organized. The truth of the matter is there's really not a whole lot of room inside this particular ad for everything that I want to show you, which brings me to just kind of a side topic. When you run out of space, there's a few things you can do. You can make things smaller, you can get rid of something, or you can put one thing on top of something else. So for example, I got this from a wallpaper place. I wanted a picture of a puppy in here. The puppy is now, as you can tell by the way it's stacked in the layers palette, in the layers control panel, it is behind all of this stuff. And again, this is not a design whatsoever, but I just put this down here just kind of in advance to show you that you either put things, make things, you can either shrink things down, overlap things, or get rid of things when you start running out of space, which really isn't what this lecture is about, but it had to be said at some point, and since it came up, I went ahead and did it. Besides, it's a golden retriever puppy. I mean, you have to admit your day's already been made because you got to see a golden retriever puppy. I mean, it's a puppy. You're having a great day. Okay. Actually, we'll talk about how we can align that image up here in just a second. But now we're getting into an actual thumbnail and design stage, so that's going to require a little bit of stream of consciousness, creativity, letting it all just come to my mind randomly type thing. And there's no sense you sitting here watching me draw thumbnails that you can't even see on screen. So we'll do that here in just a second. Back now after doing, well, to be honest, a thumbnail, which I know I told you never to do, but I want to get this lecture out to you. The time to post it is almost here, so I want to get this done. But honestly, considering how much alignment I've put into it, there's several mistakes here that are being made that I need to fix first. But the alignment is really helping it despite those mistakes. For one thing, I'm using a corner too much here. But again, I'm also running out of room. So let's talk about what is going on here that is correct in terms of alignment, which is the purpose of this entire lecture. Remember how I said that pretend that you get an extra $100 for everything that you line up with something else? Well, that's pretty much what we've got going on here. I just got very obsessive about lining up edges of elements with other edges. Major alignments going on, and then even a few small ones as well. First of all, to jump back to our previous topic, let's talk about proximity. Here I've got this text box that has the bulleted list in it. I've got it separated from the element above it, the headline, and the contact information below it by negative space, which, let me use my marquee tool here. See the negative space in between those? Well, that negative space goes all the way across the width of the layout. So that separates this from this, and it separates this from this as well. Now, one of the mistakes is I don't have nearly enough negative space in between the contact information and the business identity text information, whatever. So that's one of the things that I would have to fix. And again, that's kind of going hand in hand with using a corner. But that was necessitated by both the time constraint and the fact that I'm running out of room. And had I done, 14 other thumbnails, I would have eventually solved these problems. But anyhow, back to the topic of alignment. Well, not only do I have the various elements separated with empty space, because this image of the cute little puppy is of such a light value, in other words, it's not very dark, that it almost counts as a background image, except for the puppy itself. Everything else is either white or very close to it. So that being the case, that kind of gave me a little bit of freedom as far as placement, which I used to the fullest extent, and then some. Let's go ahead and take a look now, though, at what is aligned with what. Well, from previously, back before I hit the pause button on the record, I already had these text boxes aligned, but I just didn't have them spaced. So I spaced them, and there's an equal amount of space between these three elements. If I could, I would show you that each one is about 3/4 of an inch. There's about a 3/4 of an inch gap between these three elements. On the right side, I have the same amount of space because that's just negative space going right through there. And here's what Bob Ross, if you ever saw him in his painting show on KET back in the day, here's what he would call a happy little accident. I know that in any photo, whether it's a puppy, a person, or whatever, eyes are going to be a focal point. So it was a happy little accident that I then accentuated by repositioning everything just a little bit, so that the top line of this, which forms an invisible top line for the top alignment with the payment information, goes right through the puppy's eyes. So that kind of creates a little bit of movement across the page to here. But the main movement is down along the left side of the page, and then across to the right lower corner where the contact information is. Really, this over here is kind of just hanging by itself. Nothing really leads to it except for the puppy's gaze. The puppy's eyes seem to be gazing toward the contact information just a little bit, just enough to give our eyes a little bit of a detour over there. But we've got this aligned all down these three text boxes. We've got this text box top aligned with this text box, the business identity. We have got is first of all bad English. We have the left edge of this header text left aligned with the left edge of the bottom text box, and the left edge, I'm sorry, I've been saying the left edge. We got the right edge here aligned with the right edge here and the right edge here. So that gives us a little bit, just a tiny bit of movement. It's kind of weak there because there's so much negative space between here and here that it breaks that implied invisible line. But just a tad bit there, kind of just a barely perceptible inference there. I have the left edge of this line lining up perfectly with the left edge of these credit card logos that I've put in, and a happy little accident that I also worked a little bit with the spacing of the letters to emphasize. That lines up with the first line here of this middle line. Now, things that are that tenuous, that kind of vague, that doesn't count as real alignment, but it reinforces the real alignment that is there. So just try to get things to line up as much as possible. When we start doing projects, just try to create, or actually not try to create, try to place your elements in such a way that you can use these grids to show that things are just lining up all over the place, and that will really help organize the ad. Let me see if I can. Okay. We will get rid of the guides there. Actually, they're still there. I just made them temporarily invisible. But now, without the guides, we can still see a strong sense of alignment throughout the composition, throughout the layout. And even though the text needs, I haven't chosen any fonts, I haven't worked with the color of the text or anything like that, And even though it is just my first poor, pathetic little attempt at a layout, the alignment, I mean, yeah, the alignment is now so strong throughout the layout that it has really helped. It has slightly offset some of the problems that still exist with this layout. This wouldn't be my final project, final proposal by any stretch of the imagination, but it'll be a good jumping off point. Again, like I said, though, I'm hampered by the issue of space, and that is going to plague your career, like I said earlier, every day. People will want 15 square feet of information inside a layout as big as a postage stamp. So that's another thing I wanted to bring up in terms of this lecture, just because I can't recall if it's in our book or not. But that's just something that you'll learn along the way, and I'll go ahead and hit you with. So if you got any questions, please email me. Please read Chapter 3 and read everything before it if you haven't already. It's very important. The book gives some wonderful definitions that I just don't have the time and the bandwidth to go over here. But this should hopefully illustrate the concepts that the book is giving you. First and foremost, that everything that you can possibly line up with should be lined up with. And you should be bearing this in mind even in your thumbnail stage, as well as proximity. And that being the case, nothing gets placed just randomly on the page. Everything should line up in some way with something else on the layout. So, hope you've enjoyed it. And again, if you've got any questions, please email me. Read that Chapter 3, and I'll talk to you again in a few days.